Thanks for joining me today as we discuss nonverbal communication. My name is Nathan Seebach. I'm a nonverbal communications consultant and former Army interrogator. And today I will be answering your questions on what is nonverbal communication. Before we start, what % of communication do you think is nonverbal? Stick around to the end of the video to find out the truth. I spent 14 years in the Army intelligence community, serving as an analyst, an Arabic linguist, and finally as an interrogator. And now I work as a consultant, helping people like you learn to communicate more effectively through the use of nonverbal communication. If you like what you see here today, go ahead and hit that like button below. It helps creators like me give you more content. Now, there are 3 overarching topics when it comes to nonverbal communication. And those are the vocal aspect of it, the physical or the body language, and the image. And we'll discuss each of those in part. The vocal piece of nonverbal communication is not so much the words that you're saying, but how you're saying it. It includes things like your tone, your volume, whether you're speaking louder or softer. It includes things like the emphasis, where you put your stress on the words. One of the aspects of the vocal piece is your tone, and that includes things like your pitch and your quality. And it shows how musical of a tone you actually have and how that sounds to the audience or your hearer. Another piece is the emphasis. And when you put your emphasis on different words, it really helps the hearer understand exactly what you're focusing on. Emphasis is a powerful tool used in storytelling, and it's very commonly used among politicians as you see them try to get their point across. And some speeches are made up of entirely emphatic phrases, one after another. As a matter of fact, if you've ever been to a political rally, you know that that's kind of what gets thrown out there. Tons of emphatic sound bites. And it's what people want, it's what people love, and so that's why they do it. They want somebody who's passionate about it. So if you want to appear more passionate about what you're talking about, try to throw in some emphasis every now and again. Now let's talk about intensity. And I don't mean California. I mean the volume or the power that you put into your words. By adding intensity and volume, you'll be able to draw in your audience. Maybe it's by bringing down the volume a little bit or by increasing it to hit your point home. And a pro tip here, if you're giving a speech and you want to draw in your audience, try to speak a little bit quieter and a little bit slower. The last aspect that we'll talk about is the modulation. Modulation is the change in the rate of speech and the variety that you add to your voice when you're talking to someone. It helps you sound more interesting. We use huge ranges of modulation when we're talking to children or our pets, and it helps us get our meaning across even if they don't understand the words. Just like you can sound really angry and your dog gets the point, or you can get really excited and talk to them and they get the point. It's the same thing when we talk to babies. They understand our mood because we're changing our modulation. We're adding more variety to the tone, as we talked about before, the volume. All these pieces here, the tone, the emphasis, the volume, the modulation, intensity, they go into the vocal aspect of nonverbal communication. And by changing these up and varying them, you can become a better speaker, a better communicator with your audience. One way that you can improve on this is just by paying attention. The next time you talk to a friend or a family member, pay special attention to the vocal aspects of their nonverbals and see how they change them and vary them depending on their mood and what the situation and the story calls for. And you'll be amazed at what you can glean from that. Even if you didn't understand the words, you can still pick up on what mood they're in and how they feel about a given situation. And did you know that whispering is actually communicating without the use of our vocal cords? It's not actually created by them. It's created by turbulent wind flowing through. And singers will recommend that you keep whispering to a minimum because doing so, especially at length, can dry out your vocal cords and cause stress to them. Second topic, body language. This is probably my favorite aspect. This includes things like your facial expression. And when it comes to facial expressions, you have 42 muscles that create all different facial expressions. You can create over 10,000 different combinations using those muscles. In our communication, we only make about 3,000 of those, so maybe just over a third. But scientists have actually boiled it down to just in the low 20s of normal communication, what you see, such as surprise, anger, disgust, disappointment, happiness, joy, sorrow. And if you pay very close attention, the micro expressions are what flash in just an instant. And As children, those micro expressions are quite lengthy. You can tell just by looking at a kid's face. Well, as adults, we've learned to mask that a little bit, but not 100%. Another aspect is movement, and that includes something called kinesthetics, and that is the study of movement. You see, everybody's body moves differently. It's like your own fingerprint. It's the way that you walk. It's the way that you carry your shoulders, your posture, the elevation of your chin, how far you swing your arms when you walk, when you move, whether you're slouched or straight. And all this goes into how you're portrayed, whether it's with confidence or a lack thereof. Movement will also include things like your stance, how much space we put between somebody else. And in some cultures, there's very little space, and others there's much more. And your position or stance can show a lot about how confident you are in a given scenario, in a situation with those around you. The more space you take up, generally the higher up on the totem pole you are. Pro tip, if you want to appear more confident, just take up more space. Use hand gestures that are wider than yourself. And if you're in a boardroom, maybe put your hands out on the table a little bit wider. Take up more space in there. But don't get too cocky. Don't get overconfident. Now, we've talked about the vocal and the body movements. So question to you, are you more of a visual person? Do you prefer studying the body? Or are you more of an auditory person? Do you glean more from how the person is talking and what you hear? Let me know in the comments below what your view is and what you focus on. The last part of this is image. There's a famous body language expert named Mark Bowden, and he speaks a lot about image and what it portrays to people. He helps corporations to shape their image so what you see about the company, what they advertise, how they portray themselves, gives the audience a certain sense about them. And image is something that we always say we don't want to be judged by how we look, or don't judge a book by its cover. But the fact of the matter is everybody does it, because everything that you wear, everything that you put on as jewelry, how you do your hair, your makeup, is telling a story to everybody else. And you might be wearing something just because you like it, but that shows your personal sense of style. It might show what part of the country you come from, what part of the world you come from. And all these things put together have an impact on our audience. Sometimes you'll see some very ostentatious, wealthy people who deliberately wear a Rolex, or they've got diamonds on just to portray an image of wealth and power. And sometimes we dress more conservative if we're going into the workplace, and we have a little more fun with it when we're going out. But all of that tells a story, and it creates an impression in every single person who sees us. Though we all believe that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, we certainly do our best not to be an ugly book. What % of our communication is nonverbal? Now, there is a very famous study that was conducted that is often misquoted over and over and over. The commonly quoted statistic says 93% of our communication is nonverbal communication. And that was from a 1967 study by the respected Dr. Albert Mehrabian. And that was a very specific study. And in that, he indicated that 7% was verbal, 38% was vocal, and 55% was facial expressions, like the micro expressions we talked about. I'll post an article about that study below in the description, and you can understand why it's not really a good metric to use when it comes to nonverbal communication. The truth is that it is somewhere between 0 and 100%, depending on the situation, depending on the person. This is what I mean. If you send a text to somebody, especially if it's a one-word text, there is no nonverbal communication in that. They just get one word, especially if it's yes or no. However, if you're using sign language, that's 100% nonverbal communication. Now, some things have very low nonverbal communications, such as the discussion of philosophy. If you're talking about some very in-depth ideas, then those will be communicated through our words. But if you're moving more towards the nonverbal side, if you're in a romantic situation, then everything we do, how we move, how we look at each other, how we touch, is really going to swing towards the nonverbal side. Thank you so much for joining me today. Go ahead and punch that like button below an odd number of times, and I will see you in the next one.